There is a part of you that longs to end suffering, yet cannot name the origin of the pain. You sense it in the quiet moments, when the noise dies down and something hollow echoes in your chest. You cannot name it, but you feel it gnawing at the edges of your soul. And you search for peace, for meaning, for something that silences the silent scream within. You look to distractions, to love, to success, to transcendence, hoping one of them will offer the balm. But suffering remains not loud, not always, but persistent. It's not only what happens to you, it's what happens in you. Carl Jung once said, "Man's task is to become conscious of the contents that press upward from the unconscious." In this task lies the secret to liberation, not from suffering, but from the tyranny of unconscious suffering. What you are not aware of controls you. What you do not confront becomes fate. If you give me these minutes now not to fix your life, but to see it, you will awaken to something ancient, raw, and life-altering. The unconscious becomes visible not through force, but through invitation. And in that invitation, suffering begins to alchemize into wisdom. Suffering, for Jung, is not an enemy but a signal. It is the psychic pain that arises when the ego's life diverges too far from the self's truth. It is the emotional dissonance produced when the outer story no longer aligns with the inner archetype. You suffer because you are living a story that was handed to you, rather than the myth that was born within you. You carry the dreams of your parents, the expectations of culture, the masks of survival, but none of these are you. The longer you wear them, the more the soul protests. That protest is suffering. That is why even when you have everything you were told would make you happy, you feel empty. You were not born to fulfill someone else's image of wholeness. You were born to walk toward your own. You may be tempted to ask, how do I find this truth? But the psyche does not yield its steps to interrogation. It yields to listening, not with the mind, but with the entire being. Dreams, emotions, shadows, all are whispers from the unconscious, and they are always speaking. You suffer not because they are silent, but because you have forgotten how to listen. The first step, then, is to listen not with judgment, not with urgency, but with reverence. The psyche speaks in symbols, in images, in felt sensations. If you feel restless, that is a message. If you are drawn to certain people, places, or fears, that is a trail. Every symptom, every compulsion, every addiction is a misunderstood message from the soul asking you to stop and hear its plea. Jung believed that to become whole, a human being must individuate, that is, to become what they are at their core, apart from the roles they were given. This process requires suffering because it demands the death of the false self. It demands you leave behind the familiar prison of conformity to discover the wild landscape of the real. That is why many never begin. They prefer predictable pain over liberating transformation. But if you are still reading, still here, it means you are ready, not for comfort but for truth. And truth, unlike comfort, can set you free. There is no formula. This is not a program. This is the work of a lifetime. But the shift begins now. As you listen, I ask you to notice, where in your body do you feel tight? Where do you feel heavy? What are you resisting as you hear these words? That is the gateway. That is where the unconscious is rising. Jung said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Everything you believe you unlucky in relationships, career, health may not be fate. It may be your own rejected self calling to you through failure. Take, for example, a person who always ends up abandoned. They blame others. But perhaps deeper down, they have abandoned themselves. They have not listened to their own voice, so they attract mirrors who reflect that wound. Or the one who always feels unworthy. They seek validation, but no amount is ever enough. Because it is not validation they crave, it is a reunion with the part of them that was shamed in childhood and exiled into the unconscious. Until that exile ends, Suffering persists not as punishment, but as a beacon. The pain continues until it teaches. The suffering deepens until the split is healed. Hence, what of shadow? The term Jung popularized the part of ourselves we repress, deny, or disown. You suffer because you fight your shadow. You fear it will ruin you. But paradoxically, it is your refusal to face it that ruins you. If you do not face your anger, it becomes depression. If you do not face your envy, it becomes passive aggression. If you do not face your desire, it becomes perversion. The shadow is not evil, it is simply unconscious. It contains both the dark and the golden parts of you. The gifts you bury to survive, the passions you silence to please, the truths you dim to belong. When you embrace your shadow, suffering becomes initiation. This is not abstract philosophy. It is psychological survival. Because when you fragment yourself, you fracture your psyche. And a fractured psyche lives in chronic conflict. Parts of you want freedom, others want safety. One part wants to love, another fears intimacy. One part wants change, another clings to control. You are not one self, you are a multitude. And your healing begins when you stop trying to force unity through suppression and instead allow wholeness through inclusion. Every part of you, even the ones you hate, has a place in the greater mosaic of your being. Let us now go deeper. Ask yourself, what do I most fear others discovering about me? What truth, if spoken aloud, would shame me? What part of me, if loved, would set me free? Jung believed that the path to liberation lies not in escaping suffering, but in descending into it consciously. The alchemists called it solusioth, dissolving of the old self. You must let the old identity dissolve, not because it is wrong, but because it is too small. You must mourn who you were, in order to give birth to who you are. That mourning hurts, but it is sacred. The tears you cry for your lost self are holy. They water the soil in which the true self will bloom. There is also the matter of projection. One of Jung's greatest insights is that what you cannot accept in yourself, you will see in others and hate them for it. You are not always angry for the reasons you think. You are not always drawn to someone because of who they are, but because of what they carry for you. The person you admire may embody your unrealized potential. The person you despise may reflect your denied rage. When you become aware of projection, the world stops being your enemy and becomes your mirror. And in that mirror, you meet yourself. And what of meaning? Jung warned of the dangers of meaningless suffering. Pain without purpose becomes despair. But suffering that reveals a deeper layer of truth becomes transformation. You were never meant to avoid pain. You were meant to be initiated by it. Like the mythic hero, your trials are not detours. They are the path. You are not broken. You are being broken open. The wound is not the end, it is the womb. And what is being born through you is consciousness. Let me pause and say this. You do not need to be perfect. You do not need to be happy all the time. You do not need to be free of fear or past or struggle. What you need is awareness. That is the catalyst. Awareness of your inner world, your patterns, your symbols. Awareness of your own mind. With awareness comes choice. With choice comes freedom. With freedom comes the end of unnecessary suffering. But beware, the ego will resist this work. It will say, this is too much. This doesn't apply to me. I already know this. That is fear. That is the old self clinging to control. Let it speak, but do not let it rule. Because the moment you step beyond it, you meet the self. And the self is not a concept. It is a wholeness within you that remembers who you are beyond trauma, beyond culture, beyond ego. It is a divine pattern woven into your being. It is not something you create. It is something you remember. This, then, is a truth. You do not need to escape your suffering. You need to enter it. You need to walk with it like a guide. You need to descend into the darkness, not because it is pleasant, but because that is where your soul waits. You are not here to avoid darkness. You are here to become the light that illumines it. And when you enter the darkness, you must do so with eyes open, not as a victim, not as a warrior, but as a witness. The witness does not judge the pain. The witness does not run from it. The witness holds the tension. This tension, Jung said, is where transformation is born. The greatest and most important problems of life, he wrote, are fundamentally unsolvable. They can never be solved but only outgrown. You do not solve your suffering like a puzzle. You grow beyond it like a snake shedding its skin. Your suffering may be your initiation into adulthood, into wholeness, into your own authority. You cannot borrow your father's strength forever. You cannot hide in the echo of your mother's warmth. There comes a time when the child in you must surrender the fantasy of being rescued. That is when you meet the adult self, not the performative adult, but the soul-centered self, who can stand in the fire without being consumed. Suffering introduces you to this self, and that is the real gift, hidden in the pain, not comfort but identity. When you begin to integrate your suffering, life itself transforms. The world does not change, but your eyes do. You no longer see failure as rejection, you see it as redirection. You no longer view loneliness as evidence of brokenness, you see it as the call to deeper belonging. You no longer avoid death, but make peace with it as the natural punctuation of life. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What is this revealing in me?" You'll learn to ask different questions, more symbolic ones. You ask what your anxiety is trying to tell you. You ask what your dreams are pointing toward. You ask what the repeating conflicts in your life are demanding you to confront. You become less concerned with fixing the outer world and more curious about the inner one. You begin to live in dialogue with the unconscious. And that is when the magic begins. That is when synchronicities appear, meaningful coincidences that seem to whisper, "You're on the right path." Jung believed these synchronicities are not mere chance, but signals from the deeper order of the psyche and the cosmos. You are not separate from the universe. You are a thread in its tapestry. When your inner world aligns, the outer world reflects it. That is not superstition, it is participation. You stop merely surviving in the world and begin communing with it. You realize that suffering too has a rhythm, a timing, a place in the dance of becoming, and you stop resisting. You begin to trust. And trust is the ultimate act of healing. Not blind trust, not naive optimism, but a deep embodied trust in the self, the part of you that has always been whole, even when you forgot. The part that holds your blueprint. The part that sends you pain not to punish you but to wake you. And when you trust that self, even suffering loses its sting. It becomes a kind of teacher, a sacred whisper, a threshold to a deeper layer of you. But to reach this point, you must pass through the realm of the wounded, the inner child, abandoned and aching, the teenager, angry and misunderstood, the adult, hollow and disconnected. You must embrace each of them. They are not mistakes. They are not burdens. They are parts of your myth. And until they are loved, you will suffer not from life, but from your resistance to it. Love is the solvent. Jung said, "Where love reigns, there is no will to power. To love your pain is not to enjoy it. It is to accept that it belongs. It too has a place at the table of your soul." So let us speak now of ritual. Not religious formality, but psychological ritual acts that connect the conscious mind to the unconscious self. Writing in your journal with honesty, speaking aloud to your fear, sitting in silence with your grief, walking in nature with no agenda. These are not escapes, these are returns. They are ways of giving shape to the formless, of giving name to the unknown, of turning pain into art. And art, Jung believed, is one of the greatest pathways to healing. When you create, you do not escape suffering, you transmute it. You turn your wounds into symbols, your traumas into archetypes, your confusion into beauty. Art does not require talent. It requires courage. The courage to reveal what was hidden. to speak what was silenced, to say, "This is what it feels like inside me." And in that expression you become whole and not perfect, not healed but whole. Wholeness is not the absence of pain. It is the presence of all your parts, the light and the shadow, the masculine and feminine, the protector and the wounded. When you reject nothing, you lose nothing. And when you include everything, you suffer differently. You suffer consciously, and conscious suffering becomes sacred. Now we must speak of death, not physical death alone, but the death of illusions, of false roles, of egoic masks. Every time a belief dies, you suffer. Every time an identity crumbles, you mourn. But every death clears space for rebirth. Jung likened this process to alchemy, the transformation of the base into the noble. Your suffering is the fire, your soul is the gold, and the crucible is your willingness to feel what you have been avoiding. You cannot skip this step. You cannot leap from pain to purpose without passing through the darkness. The darkness is not evil. It is unintegrated. It contains the very powers you need: intuition, desire, rage, sexuality, creativity. All these have been exiled by the polite, productive ego. But in exile, they grow wild. They become symptoms, disorders, projections. If you want to stop suffering, you must invite them back. You must sit with your inner demons, not to be devoured, but to dialogue. Because every demon is a god in exile. To end suffering is not to end discomfort. It is to end the illusion that suffering is meaningless. It is to reclaim your role as the myth maker of your own life. To stop asking the word to fix you, and to start asking the self to guide you. You are not here to repeat patterns. You are here to break them. You are not here to please others. You are here to remember yourself. You are not here to be good. You are here to be whole, and wholeness begins now. Not when you get the job, not when you heal the wound, not when you're ready. Now, in this breath, in this silence, in this ache, in your chest. Can you feel it? That's you. Not the you they trained, the real you, waiting, longing, whispering. If you sit long enough, you will hear it. And when you hear it, you will know you were never alone. The self has always been there, quietly weaving meaning from your pain. You are never meant to walk this labyrinth of the soul by reason alone. Reason is a tool, a light, but it cannot reach the deepest caverns. The soul speaks in symbols, not sentences, in images, not logic. And the suffering you cannot explain is often the suffering that holds the greatest meaning. That is why modern man feels so empty. He tries to interpret his suffering with intellect, but suffering must be interpreted with a heart, with intuition, with a language of dreams. Dreams are the whispers of the unconscious. Every dream, no matter how strange, is an encoded message from the self. To ignore them is to ignore your soul's direct voice. You dream of falling because a part of you is letting go. You dream of being chased because a truth you've avoided is trying to catch up. You dream of strangers because you've exiled parts of yourself and they now knock on the doors of your sleep. If you want to stop suffering, do not only look forward, look inward. The dream is not a distraction, it is the map. But you must learn to read this map without arrogance. You are not the master of your psyche, you are its student. But when you stop trying to control your inner world and start trying to understand it, you open a sacred door. Behind that door is not perfection, but presence. And presence is the true antidote to suffering. Suffering grows in the gap between reality and resistance. When you stop resisting what is, you begin to engage with it. You begin to feel your way through it. You stop living from your head and begin living from your center. This is what Jung meant when he spoke of the self. The self is not the ego made better. It is not your personality optimized. It is the totality of your being, light and dark, past and future, masculine and feminine, conscious and unconscious. The self is both the seed and the fruit. You were born with it. You never lost it. You simply forgot how to return. Every breakdown, every heartbreak, every dark night is a compass needle pointing you back inward, back to wholeness, back to the divine within. And yes, Jung believed the self is divine, not in the way religion often teaches a distant deity watching from above, but in the way a spark burns in the core of everything. Your suffering is not a curse, it is a sacred summons. The soul does not speak in commands, it speaks in discomfort. When you feel uneasy, it is not that you are broken, it is that you are being summoned to evolve, to shed the old skin, to re-enter the fire and emerge as something new. But how do you live this truth? You live it moment by moment. You make small, sacred choices. When you feel sadness, you do not drown it in distraction. You sit with it. You ask it what it needs. When you are triggered, you do not lash out blindly. You pause and ask, what part of me is crying out to be seen? When you feel numb, you do not assume something is wrong. You get curious. What pain is my body trying to protect me from? This kind of attention is rare. It is radical. And it is the beginning of transformation. Most people will never go this far. They spend their lives managing symptoms, rearranging the furniture of their suffering, but never entering the room. But not you. You are here because some deeper part of you is ready. You have outgrown the skin of avoidance. The soul is knocking louder now. And when the soul knocks, the only wise response is to open. That opening may feel like breaking. But breaking is not the end, it is the beginning of being reformed. It is what Jung called the path of individuation, the journey toward becoming a true individual. Not in the shallow sense of self-expression, but in the profound sense of self-revelation. You are not here to be a copy. You are here to be an original. And every step you take toward your true self dissolves a layer of suffering. Not because life becomes easier, but because you become real. To become real is to stop performing. Stop pretending to be strong when you are tired. Stop acting wise when you feel lost. Stop presenting an image that is loved while hiding a soul that is aching. Suffering persists when we are not seen, but we cannot be seen until we first see ourselves. And we cannot see ourselves until we look not just at our beauty but at our shame, our envy, our fragility. All of it belongs. And in that belonging, a strange thing happens. The suffering begins to transform. Not because it goes away, but because it integrates. It becomes part of the story, not the villain, but the teacher. And slowly, like winter thawing into spring, you begin to feel alive again. You begin to laugh, not the laughter of denial, but the laughter of someone who has walked through hell and found flowers growing there. That is the miracle. Not escape, but integration. So I say again, give me these minutes, not to end your suffering, but to awaken you to its meaning. Suffering without meaning is torture, but suffering with meaning is initiation. You are being initiated not into perfection, but into presence, into the awareness that nothing you feel is wrong, that no part of you is unworthy, that every broken thing in you is a doorway to something sacred. You are not here to erase your scars. You are here to anoint them. And one day, perhaps sooner than you think, you will look back at the pain and say, it was not in vain. You will thank the darkness for teaching you how to find your own light. You will thank the fear for showing you where courage was born. You will thank the wound for becoming the womb of your awakening. This is not a fantasy. This is the great arc of the soul's journey. And you are in it now. There is a moment in every soul's life when it is called to awaken, not gently, not politely, but urgently. That moment often arrives in the form of crisis, loss, illness, betrayal, emptiness. What the world calls tragedy, the psyche often calls necessity. You lose what you thought you needed so you can discover what you actually are. And yes, it hurts, but that pain is not an error. It is a rupture in the lie. It is the psyche's protest against the life unlived. And if you're listening closely now, it means you're already walking through that doorway. You'll never promise that this path would be easy. In fact, he called individuation a most difficult achievement. But he also said, it is the only path that leads to life. Everything else is survival, masks, imitation, pretending. You were not made to pretend. You were made to become. And what you become depends on your willingness to face what you fear. You cannot become whole while clinging to fragments. You cannot become free while protecting your chains. To release suffering is to release the story that you were only the pain. And you are not just the pain, you are the dreamer of dreams, the carrier of ancient patterns, the living symbol of a soul that never gave up. When you touch the self, you touch the sacred. You realize your journey is not random, it is mythic. Every character in your life, lover, enemy, mentor, betrayer, was cast for a reason. They awaken aspects of you. They activate forgotten strengths. Even those who hurt you have unconsciously served the self's planet by virtue of their cruelty. But because your soul is capable of turning every cut into a code, and those codes speak of destiny, not fate. Fate is what happens when you stay unconscious. Destiny is what happens when you awaken. When you choose to engage the pain instead of escaping it. When you sit at the feet of your fear and ask it, what are you here to show me? Most run from this confrontation, but you will not. You are brave in the most sacred sense of the word, not because you feel fearless, but because you've decided to listen anyway. And what you hear will change you. You will hear the voice of the child you once were calling you home. You will hear the voice of your ancestors reminding you of the bloodline of survivors you come from. You will hear the voice of the archetype that stirs within you, the healer, the warrior, the mystic, the lover. You are not one thing. You are many faces of one soul, longing to be remembered. This remembrance will not make you immune to pain, but it will make you immune to despair, because despair is the illusion that suffering is the end. And once you know that suffering is a threshold, not a wall, you begin to move differently. You become soft where you were rigid. You become strong where you were broken. You begin to speak, not to impress, but to connect. You listen not to respond, but to understand. You cry without shame. You laugh without permission. You become the self in motion. You might wonder, will others see me differently? Yes, but it won't matter, because you will no longer be addicted to that approval. You stop contorting yourself to fit into small spaces. You stop shrinking to make others comfortable. You stop confusing belonging with disappearing. This is the gift of suffering consciously. It strips away the false belonging. It reveals who you are when no one is watching. And when you know that person, when you finally meet him in the silence, you will understand why nothing else satisfied you. You were never seeking pleasure. You were seeking home. And home is not a place. It is the feeling of living in alignment with what your soul knows to be true. That is why some people can be surrounded by luxury and feel hollow, while others have little and radiate peace. Wholeness does not come from gaining. It comes from remembering, from reconnecting with the inner pattern that has been whispering since childhood. You are more than this. You are not what happened to you. You are not what they told you. You are what you choose to become in the face of it all. And in that becoming, suffering becomes sacred. It loses its grip, not because you ignore it, but because you've integrated it. You've seen the wound, not as a flaw, but as an invitation. An invitation to compassion, to authenticity, to depth. Your suffering has taught you how to see, how to feel, how to love beyond appearances. That is the mark of the awakened soul, not perfection, but perception. The ability to look into your own darkness and not flinch. The ability to look into another's pain and not turn away. That is the power Carl Jung gave to us, not in dogma but in direction. A map, not a mandate. A way to walk with your shadows until they become your teachers. A way to sit with your suffering until it becomes your song. You will still bleed, but now you will know why. You will still tremble, but now you will trust the trembling, because you are not falling apart. You are falling into yourself. So what happens when these 23 minutes end? You'll return to your life, but not as the same person. You'll return with new eyes. You'll return with a key in your hand and the courage to open the doors you once feared. You return with the knowing that suffering is not your enemy. It is your oldest companion, waiting for you to stop running and start listening. And when you do, the suffering softens. It doesn't vanish, but it becomes something new. It becomes sacred. You begin to suffer with purpose. You begin to live with soul. You stop waiting for someone to save you. You remember you were never lost. You were only asleep. But now, the dream is ending, and the awakening has begun. Give me 23 minutes, and you'll never suffer the same way again. Because you'll know now, suffering is not a punishment. It's a passage. And the self has been waiting for you on the other side.